Hello and welcome back to another unit review for Star Wars Legion, and today we are going to be putting a lid on the second part of our Kashyyyk wave here, and cover the Dwarf Spider Droid, a unit that I was very much looking forward to appear in Star Wars Legion, and I have not been let down here. Now, we've gone over a lot of the different Dwarf Spider Droids in previous videos as they were revealed to us, so I will try to make things a little bit more brief in this video to prevent redundancy. But this is the comprehensive guide for the Dwarf Spider Droid, so I am going to be covering all the bases. But let's go ahead and start taking a look at the unit card for the Dwarf Spider Droid, who of course is going to be a single model support unit, who will be coming in at a very affordable 55 base points, though I will make note that the trend for vehicles in the Kashyyyk wave has been low-cost chassis units, who you are going to be adding more upgrades onto, including their primary weapon, so 55 points is definitely just where we get started here. After that, we are going to see a new type of upgrade slot here that is going to be the programming upgrade slot. And from what we have so far, this is going to be a mandatory upgrade that is going to appear on droid vehicles for the Separatist faction, and will dictate what type of AI they have, with a few other added bonuses and tweaks here and there. After that, we are going to see a hardpoint upgrade on the Dwarf Spider Droid. Much like the ATRT, this will be the primary weapon that is mounted in their fixed frontal arc. And for the most part, much like the ATRT, I do consider this to be a somewhat mandatory upgrade, though you can theoretically run a Dwarf Spider Droid without it, but it won't be quite the same as running that ATRT bare bones, as your melee attack is going to be a little bit weaker and you don't really have a built-in ranged attack. But next up here we are going to have the comms upgrade, something that is pretty commonplace on vehicles and droids, so of course it's going to appear on the Dwarf Spider Droid. After all, what else would that giant antenna be for? But moving over to the right side of this card, we're going to see that this is a ground vehicle, something worth considering when you are distributing those order tokens and building your list. Below that, we are going to see that this is a 6-wound vehicle with a damage capacity of 4, backed up by a white defense die with defensive surge. So we're not exactly the most durable unit here, but as we see, we do have defensive surge and surge to hit, meaning this unit is not going to be craving surge tokens in any capacity, meaning you can save those bolsters and aggressive tactics for other units in your list. And I think surging both ways is a pretty huge advantage on this Dwarf Spider Droid, which will become especially apparent when we take a look at the weapon profiles we're sporting here. And as always, going from that natural 6+ white defense die save to 5+ with the surge is effectively doubling your chances to block incoming hits, which definitely will be relevant throughout the course of a match, especially considering that there is going to be armor backing up this defensive save. But at the bottom of the card, we are going to see a Speed 2 movement, which is actually a bit quicker than I anticipated on these Dwarf Spider Droids. Now, they're not exactly slow in the movies, but I don't really see them as being as fast or nimble as an ATRT, which they very much are here. And that's something that is going to be pretty advantageous if you are trying to run a suicide flamethrower or self-destruct Dwarf Spider Droid, as this is going to be a pretty mobile unit on that larger base size, with some supporting keywords allowing it to get over terrain. But at the bottom here, we are going to have its melee attack, which is going to be the curiously named Wicked Kick, which is a single rainbow attack. And while this is backed up by a surge to hits, it's not really something you're going to be relying on. And even bare bones at just 55 points, this isn't really a good attack pool for that price. But next up, we are going to have our self-destruct attack, which will bridge us over to our keywords, as it does tie into how it activates there. And essentially, once you reach your damage capacity of 4 wounds, you will be able to trigger a self-destruct action, which of course must be done during your activation, but will be a free action that you will be able to perform after an attack action, and will hit all units within range 1, be it friendly or enemy, with a 3 red dice, blast, and impact 1 attack, and will of course then remove the Dwarf Spider Droid from the table as it is now destroyed. Now, when we first had this unit card teased to us, there was a lot of commotion about this self-destruct action, but that was prior to the reveal of our protocols and our hardpoint upgrades. And I think since then the hype around this self-destruct attack has died down a little bit, and personally I see it as much more of a gimmick than a reliable strategy. As, first of all, I don't really see this attack as anything worth deleting your own units off the table over. 3 red dice with blast is nice. And if you manage to get into something like a Rex Star or a Shore Trooper gun line and set this off, I could see you making your 50 points back in wounds. But if you're doing this just to clip 2 or 3 units, even with the blast keyword, I think you are relying on a lot of unlucky saves on your opponent's part. Though I could see this thing going off in a mob of B1 battle droids to be quite fun, but then we do also have the issue of timing here. This is a free action that can only be made during your activation, and can only be done so if you have 1 or 2 wounds remaining. Now, at that point, it's not going to take a whole lot of extra firepower to simply delete the Dwarf Spider Droid before it can activate and detonate, and if an encroaching Dwarf Spider Droid is coming towards them with 3 wounds, they might just simply hold their fire until after it activates, and perhaps scatter their forces to ensure that they don't get clipped by that explosion. Now, the obvious draw with this self-destruct is going to be pairing it with a flamethrower in that hardpoint upgrade slot, and I think that is going to be the most optimal way to make use of this self-destruct attack. But without getting too far ahead of ourselves, it is worth noting that the flamethrower on the Dwarf Spider Droid is a little bit weaker than the ATRT flamethrower, and you kind of end up relying on this self-destruct attack to accommodate for that shortcoming. So it's really not a total flat-out bonus over the ATRT when you're running it in that Distraction Carnifex role. So while I am a very big fan of the self-destruct attack as a thematic mechanic, and I think it is going to make for some very memorable and fun gaming experiences, I don't really see it as a viable strategy for players to rely on, as again, it is going to require a lot of finesse to go off, and your more experienced opponents are going to be able to play around that. But moving on from the self-destruct weapon profile and the keyword that triggers it, this unit is also going to have Armor 3, which I believe is the first time we've seen Armor 3 show up in the game. And I have to say, this is a bit of a weird choice here, in my opinion. It definitely makes terms in sense of balance, and Armor 3 is not a situation where you ask yourself, well, why didn't they just give it armor? As larger dice pools are going to be able to get around this relatively easily, and it will inspire things like fire support as a strong counter tactic against the spider droids. I just find it a little bit funny that the open-topped ATRT with a driver exposed has full armor, while the Dwarf Spider Droid that's all metal throughout only has Armor 3. Now again, both of these units are very well balanced with their armor values in relation to the points cost of the units, and I think having full armor would make the Dwarf Spider Droids OP if they did have it. I just find it a little bit off thematically, and honestly, if Star Wars Legion wasn't a game that was so good at making the rules thematic for the units, I probably wouldn't be complaining here. And honestly, I will concede that I would rather have these units be balanced than appease my obsession with thematic purism. So having Armor 3 is going to make this unit a little bit more durable, but those larger focused fire dice pools from things like fire support are really going to hurt the Dwarf Spider Droid, more so than it would your standard armored unit. But next up we are going to have some more comparisons to be made to the ATRT with the climbing vehicle and expert climber keywords, which of course allow you to climb as if you were a trooper, and means you do not have to roll dice for damage when clambering. And while this keyword doesn't really come up all the time, it is definitely advantageous and often overlooked. And with only Armor 3 on this unit, you are going to be able to climb your spider droids into cover, which is going to do a lot better job of making that Armor 3 feel more like all-around armor. So if you are running a Dwarf Spider Droid and you have the opportunity to maneuver it into a higher position to gain cover, it is definitely advisable to do so. But lastly here, we are going to have the programmed keyword, which very simply entails that you must equip a programming upgrade for this unit. So right away, we are seeing that 55 points cost is a bit of a lie here, as the Dwarf Spider Droid is not only lacking a primary weapon, but also has a mandatory upgrade with that programming. So really, 55 points is just where we're getting started. And now is the point where I usually talk about how I feel about this unit card on its face value. But like I've said throughout this video up until this point, and in prior videos, you're not really getting the full picture with just the Dwarf Spider Droid's unit card. So we're going to go ahead and skip right over and segue into those mandatory programming upgrades, which again is a new type of upgrade appearing on these droid vehicles. Now, I can't say for certain that this is going to be only on the droid vehicles in the future, but I do have a feeling that's the gimmick here, and I gotta say it is a pretty cool way of doing these units. And first up here we are going to have Attack Protocols, the first protocol upgrade card spoiled for us. And this upgrade card is going to give you AI Aim, along with Precise 2, allowing you to reroll 2 more dice each time you would spend an aim token. And at just 3 points, I am still personally a very big fan of this card. I know it's not going to work out as well on things like the Persuader class tank, but I think it's going to be right at home with some of the Dwarf Spider Droid builds. And yes, there are a lot of turns where you don't want to be opening up with an aim token, but I am still very much in the camp that those are going to be the turns where you can issue less important orders, get face-up order tokens onto these Dwarf Spider Droids, and ensure that they reach the position that they need to be in. And once they are within a firing position, be it with their range 3 or 4 weaponry, you'll be able to set it and forget it and fire fire away with an awesome aim token that rerolls 4 dice. And even if for some reason you do need to ignore AI, perhaps to do something like untap an exhausted weapon with a recovery, the super tactical droid gave us a slew of new workarounds for AI on top of the existing ones, with keywords like direct AI unit or override. So I don't think those aim action slip-ups are going to be very commonplace, so long as you plan for it and how you build your list. And in my opinion, Precise 2 for just 3 points is a pretty awesome upgrade that's going to do well on any gunline unit. And as we will see later in this video, this is going to really optimize the amount of hits you can get out of your weapons here, something that is very nice on high volume dice pools. But after attack protocols, we are going to have engagement protocols coming in at 5 points, and I want to make special note here about something I missed in the previous video, and that is the lovely face we see on this card's art. Now, on the other 2 cards, we have 2 units that were revealed to us during this wave, but here we have another vehicle, which you may recognize as the HMP gunship. And while I was expecting Vulture droids to show up as our first flyer for the Separatist, I think this may be a strong indicator that the HMP may be showing up at some point, perhaps as the Separatist equivalent of the LAT-LE. However, Engagement Protocols itself is going to be a card that is going to be a bit more of a premium and give you AI attack and AI move, meaning you can choose between the 2 rather than committing to one. So basically, you're paying a little bit more for some flexibility here, something that is going to be a lot more of a safe bet on those units who you really don't want to babysit throughout the course of a match. And I have to say, this is not a bad option here, and if you do plan on running multiple Dwarf Spider droids, it may be advisable to mix the types of protocols you are using, depending on which weapons you kit them out with. But lastly here, we are going to have Defense Protocols, a 3-point upgrade that is going to give you AI dodge, along with Nimble and Outmaneuver. Now, at first I downplayed this card a lot because I kind of glazed over the Nimble there, but this really is going to stack the durability of a unit with the armored keyword throughout the course of a match. So if you are going with a more aggressive playstyle, perhaps something like a Dwarf Spider droid with a flamethrower, this is really going to help you out when your enemies start focus firing down on you. Still, there is something to be said about taking AI move and focusing on getting into flamer range as fast as you can instead of taking dodges. But that's something that you as the commander is going to have to plan out when you're building your list and decide how and at what pace your forces are going to engage the opponent. And that really is a statement that you can apply to all 3 of these cards. It is going to require a lot of planning in the list building stage, and you're going to need to know when you will be giving these units orders, what weapons these protocols are going to be interacting with, and how you plan on engaging your enemy's units with them. But overall, I would say that all 3 are viable on the Dwarf Spider droid in certain scenarios, with defense a little bit towards the lower end here, albeit recommendable on more aggressive builds, especially with that flamethrower. Meanwhile, Engagement Protocols is going to be your safe bet on most builds, while Attack Protocols are going to prove to be very useful for gunline builds, especially when paired with a super tactical droid. But that is going to move us along to our hardpoint upgrades here, which again is going to greatly inform how you play the Dwarf Spider droid. And here we are going to start off with that flamethrower I've talked about so much throughout the video, as this pretty much has become a staple upgrade on those cavalry support units across the board for all factions, and while they in their own right aren't always the most competitive unit, they do often serve as what we like to call in wargaming a distraction carnifex. And this term is something that stems from older editions of Warhammer 40k, in which Tyranid players found it very viable to run a larger creature called a Carnifex, which was a very spongy unit that required a good amount of attention and firepower to be destroyed, otherwise they would do a ton of damage when they did smash into your opponent's lines. Meanwhile, other units like perhaps a Hive Tyrant or a just massive horde of smaller Tyranids was able to get to the front lines and engage their enemies, who, for the first few turns of the game, were so distracted with bringing down that Carnifex. And while units like the Dwarf Spider Droid and an ATRT aren't exactly the most spongy unit in the game, they are capable of doing a ton of damage relative to their points cost, which will force your opponent to either deal with this unit and divert fire away from other more expensive targets, or suffer the consequences of that weapon with blast and spray, hosing down their troops. So that is what a Distraction Carnifex is, and how it relates to Star Wars Legion, as it has been a relative tactic, again with the support cavalry units, for quite some time in the game. And while I can't say that that is the most competitive strategy in Star Wars Legion, it is one that has stayed relevant for quite some time, though it is one that teeters on points investment value. And here on the Dwarf Spider Droid, we do have a 15-point flamethrower that is going to be throwing a red and a white dice at range 1, which is backed up by the blast and spray keyword like most other flamethrowers, and fixed to the frontal arc. Now, I do have some slight issues with running the Dwarf Spider Droids as a distraction Carnifex style unit, which of course would entail using the flamethrower. And that starts off with the concept that you are basically going to be doing this to not only engage your enemies with that flamethrower, but also self-destruct, which could definitely potentially get you more hits on a turn where you would otherwise take one shot and then get lit up at the beginning of next turn. But again, that's always something easier said than done, as we harken back to my gripes with the self-destruct ability as mentioned earlier in this video. But also, the Dwarf Spider Droid does not have the durability of the ATRT with all-around armor, and if this unit is going to be wiped out by focus fire sooner than a unit with all-around armor would, it will be less of an overall distraction, which really is the key term of this strategy. Yes, we would all like for our flamethrowers to get up there and slap your opponents around a bit, but let's be honest here, more times than not, the utility you're getting out of a flamethrower unit is the threat of the flamethrower rather than the weapon actually attacking. So overall, what I'm trying to say is that I just don't know if a Dwarf Spider Droid with a flamethrower is going to be hardy enough to be an actual threat in that hyper-aggressive playstyle. And that really is where defensive protocols is going to come into play with the Dwarf Spider Droid, though if you do end up pulling that support token towards the end of a turn after 5 units have already shot your distraction Carnifex, you're not going to be getting much utility out of that upgrade, and that has me still leaning a little bit more towards engagement protocols for this highly offensive profile, though with the amount of order control that we do have in the Separatist faction, I think defensive protocols is something that a skilled player can make work, and we are going to take a look at a potential build that makes use of a flamethrower and these upgrades later on in this video. But next up here, we are going to have the nose-mounted Ion Blaster, a 10-point exhaustible weapon that is going to have range 2 to 4, and will be throwing 3 black and 3 white dice, backed up by Ion 1, Impact 2, and the Cycle keyword, meaning this will unexhaust itself on the turn you don't use it. However, much like the B2HA, we are going to be doing our best to unexhaust this weapon every turn and fire it also, in order to use it to its fullest effect. And overall, I have to say that this is a very powerful weapon profile, and with the prevalence of things like AA5s and the current meta, I could see every Separatist list including a Dwarf Spider Droid with an ion gun for insurance, and with 6 dice at range 2 to 4, it's really not that bad against anything that it shoots at, whether it's ionizing them or not. And also at just 10 points, it is going to be the least expensive hardpoint upgrade here, which makes it all the more appealing, and will give you 5 points to use on something like Linked Targeting Array, which is going to be quite nice considering that this weapon is going to want to use aim tokens to reroll that high quantity, low quality dice pool. And I think pairing attack protocols with that Precise 2 with this ion gun is going to be quite deadly, but it is going to require you to reliably negate that AI aim on turns where you need to exhaust this weapon, because much like that B2HA, you do not want to be relying on that cycle, and instead need to be firing this every turn to get your maximum use out of the unit. However, if you are stacking up on a lot of these ion guns in a single list, or you don't have a designated unit to negate that AI, aka a super tactical droid, engagement protocols will suit this weapon fine, as you will be able to just shoot, recover each turn, though that is going to deprive you of a lot of aim tokens, which you may need to outsource to something like B1s with electrobinos. But overall, I really like the idea of this guy run with attack protocols with that Precise 2, and if you're pairing that with Linked Targeting Array and giving him a face-up order token from a Super Tactical Droid's Direct each turn, you're really going to be shutting down your enemy's armor. But let's say you're a little bit intimidated by those exhaust weapons, and the lack of something that's going to naturally negate AI, like say a T-Series Tactical Droid would, is turning you off from those ion guns. Well, boy, do I have just the weapon for you. Your standard nose-mounted laser cannon is going to be a pretty impressive 15-point weapon sporting a red, 3 black, and a white die at range 1 to 3 with critical 1. Now, at base value, this is going to get you a similar amount of hits to the ion cannon, while obviously having a shorter range and lack of overall anti-armor capabilities, but you also do manage to shake that exhaust. So if you're looking for a more set-it-and-forget-it unit, pairing this with something like engagement protocols, or perhaps even still attack protocols, will give you a decent amount of damage overall, though I just don't think it's the most competitive way to fill up your support slots. I do think 9 out of 10 times it is going to be more beneficial for you to go for the gold, figure out how you're going to work around those recovery actions, and chip away at your opponent's activation economy with that Ion 1 keyword. Combine that with the fact that the ion gun starts getting better hit results when you start to factor in things like multiple aim tokens and precise 2, and it's just overall lower cost, and I think you have a better weapon overall than the standard laser cannon. And history has showed us that with the B2 Haas, clever players find workarounds for those drawbacks, and I think we will be seeing players use these ion cannons to great effect. So if you can't already tell by now, that is going to be my recommended weapon out of the 3, though it is going to require a lot of strategizing in how you use it. Meanwhile, I think both other weapons are going to be perfectly viable in more casual games, with the Suicide Flamethrower Spider Droid being a fun option that may eke its way into the competitive scene. But lastly, we are going to move along and take a look at our comms upgrades here. Yes, I know it's much less exciting than our new programming or weapon upgrades, but there are some decent and possibly obvious upgrades that are going to be pretty decent here. And first up here, any unit that is going to be getting within range 1 of your opponents is an obvious contender for Comms Jammer. And I do think this card has a very unique interaction with the Dwarf Spider Droid when you are playing that hyper-aggressive Distraction Carnifex with a Flamethrower role. As with melee units using Comms Jammer, you're kind of adding a bonus on there once you're in combat, but being in melee combat does protect you a little bit in its own right from incoming fire, but that is simply not the same with the Dwarf Spider Droid and the Flamethrower, as it is going to still be up close and personal, but engaging in range combat, meaning all nearby units are going to be able to blast it. And as I mentioned earlier, with Armor 3, your enemy is really going to benefit from things like fire support to create large dice pools to skirt hits around that limited armor capacity. And if your Comms Jammer can prevent enemies from doing that fire support, you're going to have a lot more durability against any potential nearby units. So while those aspects do make it pretty appeasing to throw onto the Dwarf Spider Droid in that Flamethrower role, there is somewhat of a drawback here where I would say perhaps save those 5 points, and that's because we are going to be likely self-destructing or trying to self-destruct this unit, and because of that there is a good chance that the Spider Droid itself is not going to be around long enough to justify the presence of this upgrade. So while I do see Comms Jammer as a viable option here, I'm very much on the fence when it comes to its practicality, though I figure it is worth mentioning. But next up here, we are going to have HQ Uplink, and if you guys know me, I'm a very big fan of stacking those exhaustible cards to make your recovery actions all the more worth it, which honestly may be the wrong train of thought when it comes to recovery actions, but hey, HQ Uplink is also an awesome way to get around AI, which could be extremely advantageous when you are running that ion gun. Though you could always save the points and go with engagement protocols, and do the old attack recover process. It really depends on whether you want to benefit from that precise 2 or that nimble and outmaneuver. Just know that you are going to need to rely on your token generation from another source, as you will likely get caught in a recover fire order if you are going that HQ Uplink route. But lastly here, we are going to have linked targeting array, something that is going to be my preferred upgrade in the comms slot, and will pair very nicely with the AI attack protocols, as it will allow you to make those recoveries on the ion gun and still get aim tokens, so long as you have received that face-up order token. So overall, I gotta say, I'm not really crazy about the comms upgrades here, aside from linked targeting array on those builds where you do include attack protocols. And with all of our upgrade categories wrapped up, we are going to move along and take a look at some of my recommended builds on how to run the Dwarf Spider Droid. And first up here, we are going to have something that I am the most excited about running, and that is going to be what I call the Ion Turret. And here at just 73 points, we are going to be running attack protocols along with the Ion Gun, of course, followed up by linked targeting array. And this unit will definitely be sitting within range 1 to 2 of a super tactical droid, and receiving a face-up order token from that direct AI keyword. That way, even on the turns where I am making recovery actions, I will be making use of that precise 2 keyword, and potentially even make use of that do not underestimate our means 3-pip card from the super tactical droid to make free recoveries, which will give me more flexibility with these droids. Now, overall, I gotta say this build is awesome for just 73 points, but I think it does have diminishing value the more you stack it in a single list, as it does require a bit of babysitting, and I really do see players who want to run more than one Dwarf Spider Droid mixing and matching the protocols, depending on which one is going to be babysat by that super tactical droid. And if I were to run 3 Ion Spider Droids in a list, I would probably do something like this. Run one with this exact build who is going to be sitting next to that super tactical droid, and run 2 who swap out for engagement protocols, and then drop link targeting array, who will perhaps rely on aim tokens elsewhere, perhaps again from B1 battle droids with electro binos, and I could see that being a pretty awesome saturation of ionized firepower, something that I could see being a serious threat to Rebel bus list, or ironically, droid lists, both of which are currently incredibly popular in the meta, though like I mentioned earlier in this video, running 1 unit of this build alongside a super tactical droid may be enough on its own, and I could see it getting some serious mileage in a lot of separatist lists. But next up here, I am going to have a bit more of a casual build, one that is going to make use of the standard laser cannon here, and this one is going to very much follow the set it and forget it mentality, making use of that a little bit more reliable laser cannon, along with engagement protocols, which makes for a unit that can somewhat freely roam around the battlefield and engage enemies with a respectable amount of firepower. Now, I did throw link targeting array on here also, though I think with this current build you could probably drop it, but you could perhaps keep it and then throw on something like attack protocols instead of engagement, and mimic our previous recommended builds with a different main weapon, as they are somewhat similar. And that's something I would actually perhaps try in a Kraken list build, but as I said earlier, I really do think the ion cannon is a better weapon. But if, for whatever reason, you're not comfortable with getting those face-up order tokens reliably and ensuring that you can unexhaust that weapon, this is an alternate route that you could go. But lastly, we are going to have our Martyr droid here. Of course, I have to include the Distraction Carnifex / Suicide Flamer Rush. And here we are of course going to be equipping engagement protocols, along with the flamethrower weapon upgrade. And while I do have Comms Jammer listed here, it is an easy drop for me to save 5 points, which if you do plan on running multiple flame spider droids is something I would highly recommend on doing, as again, your exploding spider droid may not be around long enough to make good use of it. Also, as I mentioned earlier in the protocol section of this video, it is also worth considering dropping engagement protocols for defense protocols, but you really are going to need to be in tune with the cadence of how your army marches forward and when these units are going to be engaging your opponents. That being said, much like the Comms Jammer, if you are running multiple of these flame spider droids, it may be worth swapping them all out to defense protocols, as your opponent really is at that point going to have to start sinking a lot more attention and a lot more shots into these droids, lest they face their wrath. And I could see that being quite the overwhelming factor. Though if you are running just one of these guys, I would probably stick to engagement protocols, as that increased speed may make it seem like more of a threat to your opponents, thus triggering a more intense reaction to it. But overall, I think there is a lot of different unique ways to kit out these dwarf spider droids and different avenues of approach for the various weapons that you have equipped. And that's something you really can't say about every unit in Star Wars Legion, and in my book that makes the dwarf spider droid very interesting from a collection standpoint. But that is going to wickedly kick us into the next portion of the video where I discuss my overall thoughts on the dwarf spider droid and give it a ranking relative to how I am initially perceiving this unit prior to its release. And honestly, I don't know if there's too much else to say here. I think the Ion Dwarf Spider Droid is going to be an incredibly powerful unit to include in your list, albeit in limited quantities, and they are going to pair exceptionally well with super tactical droids, regardless of which of the 3 you decide to run. After that, I think the Exploding Flamethrower Spider Droid is one of the most unique and fun units we've had in a while. I don't really think it's the most competitive unit, but in those more casual games, I think it's going to be, perhaps, I don't know, a blast. But in all seriousness, I do think the Dwarf Spider Droid is held back in a few areas, most notably with it only being Armor 3. I think players will be surprised with how easy it is to destroy a Dwarf Spider Droid, which again is a major ding to that self-destruct attack, but also a big bonus, in my book, to that range 4 ion weapon, as I think they will melt to concentrated fire support, so keeping your distance may be advisable. Also, their AI protocols are something that you are going to need to do a bit of a dance around. It's all easy enough when you have a single Dwarf Spider Droid in a list, but once you start adding multiple, it does hold them back a bit, and cap off their potential as something that would fill up your support class, which to this date is still one of the weaker rankings in Legion. So there is a lot of push and pull for the Dwarf Spider Droid, working both for and against them, and maybe I have a little bit of personal bias seeping in here, but I am going to be giving them a ranking of B+. In the right list at the right time, I think they can be great, especially with that ion gun. And I think they are going to be a ton of fun overall to play, more so than other units like the ATRT. And of course, I did already pre-order 3, so maybe I am just trying to reassure myself a bit here. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Do you agree with my various assessments on the weapons they can run, and how you should field them? Is there anything I may be missing out on? As always, explain your reasoning. And if you liked the video, go ahead and leave a like. Consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you can see more unit reviews and news updates for Legion. And as always, until next time, take care.